Achtung. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland, who is stateside in, where are you, Jim?
Carlisle, Pennsylvania, not to be confused with Carlisle Lake District or Carlisle, Cumbria. And I'm staying in a Civil War house. They're very proud of their Civil War heritage over here. Yeah. And if it was around in the 1860s, then it says Civil War house and a plaque on the outside.
Excellent. Are you a Confederate in the attic then, Jim? Is that what you are?
I really am. And look at this room. I mean, I know this is audio only, but it's very green and it's got lots of rose wallpaper all over the place, including on the ceiling.
Lovely.
And all the furniture is dark brown, and it's got a sort of 70s meets Dickensian kind of vibe to it.
Lovely.
So it's all quite gloomy.
But you're not having a gloomy time, because you've been sitting... we're obviously, inevitably, we have a We Have Ways WhatsApp, ladies and gentlemen, where the team plan and discuss and share photographs and stuff. And we have had a torrent of documents from Jim photographed on the WhatsApp, some of which have been truly extraordinary to read, James. You're having the time of your life in that archive, aren't you?
Well, I've had a great time. I've been I went straight into Charleston, South Carolina, and I was staying with James Scott, friend of the show, and now much firmer friend generally. He's a lovely guy. His family are great. He lives in a really beautiful part of a sort of suburb, I suppose, of Charleston called Mount Pleasant, and had a great couple of days with him. And also at the Citadel, which is where all the Mark Clarke papers are, which is the College of the South. The papers were absolutely fantastic. I mean, really just some amazing stuff. And, I was sending over various bits and pieces as they were coming through, including sort of hand pencil written letters by Monty, but also kind of notes on morale and all sorts of stuff and attitudes.
Well, it's that morale note that I really wanted to talk about. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary piece of paper.
Well, let's get on to that in a bit. But the other thing that was really fantastic was he has these huge photo albums. Huge, great big things. They're probably about kind of, 2.5 feet tall by, 1.5 feet wide. And they're just stuffed full of photos. So I've taken nearly 1,000. And photos of the photos.
Yeah.
So many of them that you're given such a vivid impression of the changing seasons, from September all the way through to kind of, the fall of Rome. And the conditions in which they're fighting. I was thinking, God, this is like literally one of the... You couldn't ask for a better tool for someone who's trying to sort of describe what it was like fighting there.
Yeah.
And you certainly get the impression of where, very clear idea from where Bill Malden gets his cartoons of sort of Bill and Joe from. Yeah. That kind of lugubriousness. There's a photo I found of a whole load of GIs sort of standing in the rain, waiting in the chow line. Yeah. I mean, it's just straight out of one of his cartoons. But also just, lots of views of mules going up into the mountains and just gargantuan amounts of destruction.
Yeah. But that's the striking thing for you, isn't it? It's the destruction, isn't it? It's unbelievable. You're starting to... Because last time we spoke, I think you're really starting to ask questions about the Italian campaign and how you've come from essentially... Although... You've come from Tunisia, where there are people, of course, but you've essentially come from a desert campaign where you're not slogging your way through cities. You're not having to decide whether to flatten Naples or not, or whatever. And of course, there is inevitably, and I think you have to bear this in mind that there is an attitude shift that you're now in a European country, and one that is. Italy, because of its Roman heritage, is glamorised in the Western mind, isn't it, as an important place culturally and the Renaissance and all that. Somewhere you need to take proper care of before you shell the shit out of it, basically, and all that, in a way that actually in the North Africa, Libya, Tunisia, no one's thinking like that at all, are they? They're not giving that a minute's thought. They're thinking about destroying the German army any which way they can.
Yep.
And they come to Italy, and there is a cultural collision immediately with the fact it's a European country, but also they've got a way of war that's been working for them now for the best part of a year, so they're probably going to stick to it, aren't they? Because after all, especially the British feel that they've finally cracked it. They finally figured out how to defeat the Germans after 2 years of having their tail pulled comprehensively all over that theatre in particular. So you can see why when they get to Italy, You know, you think, well, we'll stonk that place regardless. But then they're caught in the fact that there is a population there, and there is this idea that Italy is a cultured place, and that's what I'm driving at, isn't it? It's that, you know, it's a Eurocentric view of a battlefield as well.
Yeah, there's 44 million people in Italy.
Yeah,
you know, so it's and Naples is one of the most densely populated cities in the whole of Europe, if not the entire world.
Yeah.
So this is what you're suddenly dealing with, and obviously the firepower heavy kind of way of war is great from the point of view of kind of trying to save as many lives as possible of your own side, but not great in terms of trying to kind of keep destruction down. Yeah. And of course, the Germans are destroying everything as well as they're retreating, because that's kind of, that's the whole point, to try and slow down the Allies.
Yeah.
And you've got this landscape, which is literally just a spine of mountains just spreading down either side to the coast on this very narrow peninsula. And you can just see how they've got themselves into this terrible pickle, this terrible problem that they've got to do something, because they're in the Mediterranean with these vast amounts of forces.
Yeah.
Overlord is not until May. Yeah. And it's different from a land campaign. It's different from the Eastern Front, where you can stop and start whenever you like because you're just on land. Everything about which the Western Allies do is about shipping and dependent on shipping.
Because the whole thing is an expeditionary force. The entire thing. Everywhere they go, the whole thing, Yeah, they haven't got their backs to the Urals.
Right. So that means you can't just sort of go, okay, shall we just pause for 6 weeks, gather our thoughts, and then kind of crack on again in October? It doesn't work like that. You've just got to, so the mounting of an expedition, of an operation, is a much bigger undertaking. It involves amphibious landings, which are unbelievable. But of course, that's not really washing with the Soviet Union and the Red Army and Stalin, and it's not really washing with the people in the corridors of Whitehall and Washington either, because they're just seeing...
Famously, Stalin compares D-Day to a river crossing. He's going, what's the problem? What's your problem here?
Yeah. But the problem is you've got to do something. Actually, the weird thing is that the Italian campaign very quickly actually fulfills its aims. It does draw off large numbers of German troops. It does keep the pressure on. But it also keeps the pressure on the Allies as well, and their ability to mount other operations. And the problem is, don't forget that yes, it's kind of, Germany first, but quite often it isn't actually Germany first in terms of resources. Yeah. It's quite often Pacific first. And there's a whole tranche of kind of high-level US commanders, whether it be McCarthy or whether it be King, who absolutely wanted to be Pacific first. So the demands of global shipping are just absolutely immense. And I think... I've been sort of reading a little bit of kind of secondary sources. I've been looking at Rick Atkinson and Jackson and various others, but I'm going to try and keep off that because I don't want to have my mind clouded by kind of what other people are writing. But what's absolutely clear is that the shipping thing is a nod is taken to shipping, but it is... Aren't the Allies stupid for kind of realising this and all this kind of stuff, and all the Anglophobia and Americaphobia and all the tensions and all the rest of it. And what's really amazing is those tensions don't exist in the way that people kind of present them. Yeah. And B, it's just not taking into account the realpolitik of the situation, which is you've got to do something, and actually there is a point to this beyond it. It's just that it just turns into a kind of misery fest in very, very quick order. Because the priority of resources is going to the building up of the airfields at Foggia. Yeah. And partly that's because the number one strategic aim is to get strategic air forces in there as quickly as possible to tighten the noose around Germany. Yeah. But the second reason is because they think it's going to be an easier fight than it is. And they've just underestimated it. And that's because they think, the German will's gone and that they're going to retreat to the Pisa-Rimini line and all this and all this sort of stuff. So it's sort of the way the Italian campaign folds out in the kind of the latter end of 1943 and the very beginning of 1944 is... It's a kind of sort of... It's an accumulation of a misappreciation, if you see what I mean. Rather than, any particular commander lacking grip or anything like that. It's not that they're doing a bad job. It's just that the circumstances are so massively stacked against rapid progress. And there's no way around that. And it's all very well kind of Brooke going into, saw such and such, he was lacking grip. I mean, it's just... It's just absolutely awful. Whichever
it's an extraordinarily tall order, the whole thing.
The whole thing, in a way that Sicily wasn't. And they're so overcompensate with Sicily in terms of how many troops and resources and making sure that it's not a cock-up and all the rest of it. But they're not in that position to do that, to give it that same level of support. But because by this point, things are really turning towards Overlord, which is due to happen the following May, and operations in the Pacific. And you can understand why they're changing the Pacific, because suddenly they're on the charge. They've the tide is turning. Because
you've got to do something. Exactly the same point you're making about the Mediterranean. You've got to do something. You've got to exploit your advantages, or
right, exactly,
or bet on the progress you've made. And nothing succeeds like success, and strategic momentum is as important as anything else. I mean, I think it's the other thing. I think is really, really, really interesting, because when you were posting from Mark Clarke's archive, someone popped up and said he was a lousy general. Look it up, and I replied, he's in the archive looking it up, right? Like, like help me out here. But but the thing is, Rome. Rome. Inevitably, people go, oh, he did this. He let the Germans go to take Rome. But if you're talking in terms,
he just so didn't.
I know, Jim. But the thing is even if he did, right? Strategy at some point has to enter the political realm, or in fact, actually, if it is strategy lives in the political realm, and as well as I do, if you can deliver a capital city. If your strategy can deliver you a capital city, it's basically irresistible as a thing to do. You could argue there was no point diverting to Paris when you're chasing the hare out of the Falaise Gap. You could argue that's a distraction. You could argue that what you ought to be doing is diverting absolutely all of your effort to destroying the hare as they try and escape the Falaise Gap, rather than getting diverted to Paris. But come off it. The political element of your strategy says capital cities really matter. And so you can see completely what you want to make it look like you're making progress in Italy. And if you've taken Rome, that sure as shit makes it look like you're making progress, right? I mean,
the thing about
and that
Rome
your strategy's delivering victories and results.
In the pre-plan for Diadem, which is the May attack to break Cassino and take Rome.
Yeah.
Sixth Corps, which has been at Anzio since whatever it was, the 22nd of January.
Yeah.
Is supposed to burst out, cut across, and cut Route 6, which is the Via Casalina, which is the main road going up the Liri Valley directly into Rome, and go straight to Valmontone. And cut the retreat of the German 10th Army, which is the army that has been facing off the Allies at Cassino. The problem is, because 8th Army have got stuck in the Liri Valley, and because the French on their flank and then US 2 Corps on their flank have gone much faster, the German 10th Army has not used the Via Casalina as a retreating point. It's using other routes which are further inland. So by going to Valmontone, you're not actually stopping the 10th Army from retreating. Not a single German soldier has retreated down the Highway 6. So the situation has changed. So you obviously then have to respond to that. On the other hand, as you're breaking out of Anzio and doing that drive towards the Highway 6, you're running, your flank is facing the 14th Army in the Auburn Hills on the Caesar line, which is the next defensive line. So instead of risking his 6th Corps, he turns and faces them. And in so doing, destroys 14th Army, and in the process of destroying 14th Army, gets into Rome. Now, it's like, what's not to like?
Yeah.
Okay, 10th Army has been very, very badly mauled in the Cassino battles, but has escaped up a different routes. But a bonus to Diadem, which wasn't in the pre-battle plan, is the destruction of 14th Army, which is at the hands of Mark Clarke's 6th Corps and part of his 5th Army. Yeah. And you think, hang on a minute, and you're criticising him for this. This just seems insane. I mean, what's a guy got to do? He's taken Rome, he's destroyed 14th Army. I would have thought, pats on the back is kind of what's required.
Well, and also
here,
given
not kind of enduring criticism.
And also given the focus is on Overlord, to do that and go, actually, hello, there's the theatre here still that's costing us an awful lot of blood and money and effort, and we've delivered a major victory. You know, one way or another, Rome is an extraordinary victory. You know,
well, it is. It's the biggest Allied victory on land to that point,
and they haven't Allied victoried their way into it by obliterating the place. And you know,
no, not at all.
Because I think it is very interesting, this Allied way of war thing. That if you're relying on firepower, then what's going to happen is you're going to flatten places. If you can't convince the enemy to engage in manoeuvre warfare, which is essentially. This is essentially the problem in Italy, isn't it? They just can't quite convince the Germans to engage in manoeuvre warfare. And then we come to Normandy and sort of the same thing happens. You know, and of course it's to France's immense benefit in the long run that the Germans decide to fight a static defence line in France, isn't it? Because only Normandy gets smashed up. That doesn't extend to the whole of the rest of the country. You know, it's Caen and it's Saint-Lô, Caen, not even Bayeux, because Bayeux falls without that kind of confrontation. But you know what I mean? It's that.
I mean, those pictures, those incredibly vivid coloured pictures of Saint-Lô.
Yeah.
Which is just utterly destroyed.
It's destroyed.
I mean, it's like something out of Syria. You know, it looks like a leopard.
Well, or Mariupol. I mean, this is the thing. You were, you know, because you were saying in your messages, you were saying the destruction in Italy was really making you think of Ukraine and really making you think of the stuff we've seen from Ukraine. And after all, the boot's on the other foot here, because it's the Americans and British and the Allied way of war, which is to stonk somewhere, you know, to shell it heavily and bomb it to move on. And if it's an urban area, so be it. You know, they're doing that. Aren't they?
Yes, and those pictures I was sending over, there's that sequence from San Pietro, and San Pietro is a kind of famous, infamous place. Not partly because Ernie Pyle is there, partly because John Huston comes along. He's over there to do a film about the capture of Rome, and ends up doing, because it isn't captured till for a further 6 months. He ends up doing a film called San Pietro.
Yeah,
and the village itself is still there, but in ruins.
Yeah.
So you can walk down those narrow streets. You know, there's certain shots where I kind of go, I know exactly where that is.
And so if you Google Maps that, is that the San Pietro that's east of Taranto? It's the San Pietro, which is it's literally a couple of miles south of Cassino. Right.
And it's very beautiful. It's on the side of Monte San Mirko. And it's just completely ruined. I mean, it's just, you know, no one ever went back there. And they rebuilt the village sort of below it, a modern village.
Right.
And there's an incredibly upsetting picture of a dead San Pietran woman on the ground, you know, in the road, and a GI leaning over, you know, squatting down beside her. Yeah. And it's absolutely gut-wrenching. And I suppose it's more gut-wrenching because of the scenes we've seen from kind of Bucha and Izium and Mariupol and all the rest of it. Yeah. And you just think, crikey, you know, we haven't moved on at all in many ways. But to just very briefly go back to Mark Clarke, I mean, I'm just not quite sure where this kind of I think this reputation has come from memoirs that appeared after the war, really, and it's partly because of the Texans and the crossing of the Rapido. But actually, again, you know, you start looking at this. You know, I've been reading this account by a chap called Hamilton Howes, who's a tank battalion commander. Yeah. I think there's 700 from, I can't remember which tank battalion it is off the top of my head. Yeah. But they're sitting there to give support, and they're never called upon. And then there's one of these, and then I sent you yesterday the Ronnie Spears one, but there's this I had never heard of this, but I've just come across it. Fort Benning, which is one of the kind of, you know, the great training places for the great
officer place, yeah.
They had, post-war, they were doing their kind of staff courses, their higher staff courses, and they had to, you know, each of the officers that was at this staff course had to do, or this officer training course, had to submit a paper. Yeah. And of course, they're all doing it on places that they took part in. And there's one on the account of the Rapido, and there's absolutely no question that the officer here in this one from the 36th, I think he's from the 143rd Regiment. Yeah. Which is the one that kind of attacks, if I remember rightly, north of Sant'Angelo, there's an attack north of this little village, which is on this outcrop overlooking the Rapido. And then there's a 141st attack south, maybe the other way around, but I think that's what it is. Yeah. He's basically saying that the problem was all to do with the lack of coordination between the infantry and the engineers.
Right.
And, and I also know, in addition to that, one of the other problems is that they've got all this firepower and they're not using it in the right way. Because what you've got is you've got the river, which is quite, has these quite steep sides, and so is a bit of a faff to get across. Although it's not terribly wide, but you've got this little kind of floodplain either side of it. And then the ground rises again, a couple of 100 yards or whatever beyond on the far side. And of course, on the high ground, that's where your machine guns are, and on the low ground are sort of mines and wire and all the rest of it, because it's such an obvious crossing point. And unlike the French at Sedan, for example. And what you needed was people doing suppressing fire onto those machine gun places and saturate the ground on the other side and all the rest of it. And that just doesn't happen. So you've basically got infantry crossing a deep, a deep but narrow river.
Yeah,
straight into fields of machine gun fire. It's kind of no wonder they all got slaughtered.
Yeah, I mean the thing is,
but that is not the army commander's fault.
No. That's lower down.
That's the point.
Yeah, lower down the food chain. And the thing is, though, the terrain in Italy is essentially that problem again and again and again and again and again and again, like utterly relentlessly. You're facing physical obstacles that you've got to overcome. You need your engineers and your infantry talking to each other properly. Your artillery's permanently on the move so there's obviously gaps between, or it's leapfrogging permanently. So you can't bring all your firepower to bear because some of it's moving, some of it's shooting. There's this sort of because it is this ridgeline to ridgeline thing. Every single time you reset. And every single time you reset in worse shape, don't you? Because you've had...
and the officer that writes this report of the Rapido, everything he writes in it is referenced, and then every so often it goes personal experience, and there's a bit that says. And as we advance to this, we're going. First of all, we had to cross the Volturno, which was a really tough fight, and you're spending nights out in the rain, on rocks, on mountainsides, and beyond that, there's another ridge of mountains, and beyond that, there's another ridge of mountains. At the bottom, the reference is personal experience, and you kind of think that's the problem.
Yeah,
and obviously morale takes a massive hit because. Yeah.
Well,
why wouldn't? And if you're looking at your 3Ms, I would say that the problem with the winter of the Italian campaign is that those 3Ms start to get a little bit broken.
Well, should we take a quick break and come back to that, because there's a fascinating document from before the winter, which is the other interesting thing. We'll see you in a tick. Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland, of course. James, who is somewhere in the deep south, his nose in an archive. And you went to see James N. Scott the other day, didn't you?
So I saw James Scott and I talked to him. Then I drove up from and then I went round the Yorktown and the USS Laffey, which is a destroyer. I mean, they were both saw lives in the Cold War as well.
Yeah.
But obviously, I was looking at it through my World War II prism, and so that was good fun. And then I had a great time with James. I actually did a podcast with him about the war below and the submarines, which was just fantastic. Then drove up to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, via Bedford. And Bedford, Virginia is where the National D-Day Memorial is. And of course, why is it there? Well, it's because of the Bedford boys, those 21 that were killed on D-Day. And it's incredibly affecting and moving and all the rest of it. And I went into the little town museum that they've created, which is in Green's Drugstore. And Green's Drugstore is where they had the telegram office. And it wasn't until the 17th of July that they got the ticker tables started coming in.
Right.
And the girl was having to paste the lines of the ticker tape onto the little bits of paper.
Right.
And suddenly realised it was kind of one after the other of these boys that they all knew.
Yeah.
And, Bedford was a town of about 3,000. So, really small farming community in the Appalachians. Yeah. Really lovely. And suddenly this absolute tragedy just befalls them. And... including, a pair of brothers who were killed, and they're all literally slaughtered. They're all Company A, so they're of the 116th, and they're all, they're all slaughtered on that opening sequence, attacking the Verville Draw at the western end of Omaha Beach. But again, it's like 6 weeks later that they all find out because they're just missing in action.
God,
that's the problem.
That's horrendous. Isn't
so anyway, so that was all very moving, and then I drove on up to Carlisle. A hell of a drive. I'm not going to lie, but up here in Carlisle, and this is the U.S. Army War College, which of course is where Mike Nyberg works. It's where Tammy Davis Biddle works. Caught up with them last night, which was great, and a couple of other historians, both of whom were confusingly called Mark. But one's an economic historian, the other one is big strategy stuff. Yeah. But he's actually second Mark is a black historian, and he wants to come on the show and talk about. Africa, the experience of African Americans troops in Australia.
Oh wow!
I said all over that like a rash. Yeah, please come on.
Oh wow! Yeah, that'd be cool.
That sorted up. And Tammy wants to talk about the B-29.
Yes.
And her view is that by the time it was effective, it was too late. Right. And the amount of resources. I mean, we were talking about...
Yes, yeah.
And she was saying, well, just think how many LSTs you could have had for the cost of the B-29 project. Yeah. And the other thing she wants to talk about is the experience of bomber crews, of what it was like. How do you cope with having to kind of, 1 minute being in the cinema in Lincoln with your sweetheart, and the next minute having to go on this sort of terrifying 10-hour trip.
Well, funny enough...
juxtaposition.
Well, funnily enough, the way Max was talking about that the other day made me really ponder. The bomber, the fighter boys were all like tally ho, and the bomber lads were all, one long walk to the gallows, basically.
Yes, and that's absolutely clear when you look at the accounts, particularly from in the 8th Air Force.
Yeah,
the fighter pilots are having the time of their lives. I mean, forget Goodbye Mickey Mouse by Len Dayton. I mean, this is really they're having an absolutely superb time.
Yeah.
Really, compared to the bomber crews, they're all kind of morale is plummeting by the end of 1943.
Right. Okay. So on the subject of plummeting morale, you sent an extract from the monthly sanitary report, 13th August.
Oh, great! So you've got it because I haven't got that in front of me.
Got it in front of me, 31st of August, 1943. Right. So. You were saying, of course, come the winter, morale takes a plummet, but that's possibly because morale is poised to plummet. Because they're not quite on top of it. It's the interesting thing. So this is, confidential equals British confidential. So it's crossed out at the top of it. Declassified in September 58. And this is attitudes and beliefs observed in officers and enlisted men with comments on morale. The following general beliefs and attitudes have very frequently been noted in discussions with patients. 1, that they have been expended without consideration for their rest and safety. One of the most frequent complaints met with is that veteran troops were not given sufficient rest after the Tunisian campaign. I mean, that is really interesting. And, of course...
And hard to argue with.
Well, but also one has to wonder what would be sufficient rest. Because if you've been in combat, you might think, well, that's plenty of that. Thank you very much. Time for a rest. 2, certain troops were doing all the fighting, particularly their own units. This belief was widespread amongst 1st Division men. I mean, that's got to be a common soldier's complaint, that we're doing all the work and the blokes in the line along next to us haven't got their finger out and aren't really taking part properly. And we did the hard bit, and that must be a complaint as old as time, right?
Yeah, and it further manifests itself a couple of months later when when 51st Division men are transferred from the 51st Highland Division to the 46th and the 5th.
Yeah.
3. Goes, you know what? You can get stuffed.
Yeah. 3. There was a deep-seated conviction on the part of the 1st Division men that they had been promised to be returned to the United States after the Tunisian campaign. Well, that goes back to the first point, doesn't it? That what's the rest they think would be appropriate? It's going home.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quite interesting, right? And then we get into the sort of morale the caretaking of morale nitty gritty. 4, that places of recreation were not provided and existing places were put out of bounds. You see, that's where we get into the nitty gritty. 5, that pest exchange supplies were not available. So the men are saying there's no recreation for them. The pest exchange, so they've got problems with lice and stuff. So they feel foul. They don't feel looked
and Mozzies.
They don't feel looked after. That they've been frequently fired on by their own artillery, bombed and strafed by their own planes. Well, it's the US military. What am I going to say? Although, that's the thing in Peter White's book, is his list of men killed with the Jocks. Most of it's 25-pounder, as far as he's concerned. It's British artillery, or a sizable portion. Anyway, so that's a common problem. But what strikes me is the places of recreation, pest supplies. They're things you can do something about. In the rough and tumble of warfare, friendly fire, especially during this period of the war, is part and parcel of stuff. And also, how are they really to know? Number 7, that following the Tunisian campaign, they did not receive recognition for their efforts or heroic deeds, in inverted commas. They noted this especially in the attitude of civilians of nearby communities. So basically, the nearby communities aren't pleased to see them and don't feel that they've been liberated. But that may well be because the local communities have had their villages destroyed, and and a great big dirty destructive army showing up out of nowhere and taking your chickens might not make you think they're particularly heroic. I mean, the sort of these are listed as points, but there's so many boundaries and blurred edges to all these points, aren't there? A definite fear of replacement centres was frequently noted. The patients dreaded the uncertainty of placement, long periods of inactivity, and inability of replacement centres to handle their cases without due delay. That is
get that with Spike Milligan, don't you? When he gets sandfly fever,
exactly.
And eventually he has to go, come and get me.
Yeah, exactly. He can't get out, can he? And he doesn't know where he's going to end up, and all that. I think that's really, really interesting because what we've got at the top is people saying, I've done enough fighting, thanks. I thought I was going back to America. But actually they're going, I want to be with my unit. When I'm in a replacement centre, I don't like it. I find it disruptive and disturbing.
Loads of blokes I don't know, they're not my mates.
I dreaded the uncertainty of placement. They're dreading that, even at the same time as they're saying, can't you send us home? And I think that's really interesting. But
they want to be sent home together. That's the difference.
Exactly. And they want to go back to their unit, who they feel has done all the fighting and no one else has done any of the fighting. If you logically extend the idea that the other units aren't fighting as hard, well, why wouldn't you want to be posted to one of those units? Well, you don't. You want to go back to your pals. You want to go back to the people you've been training with. That's really interesting.
Human emotion's not necessarily logical, is it?
Well, no, of course, but it's interesting because where are the straight lines through this? What's interesting is that the avoidable stuff is managing. These are questions of management, the avoidable stuff. I think you probably can never avoid the idea that soldiers think that they're doing all the fighting and the guys next door have got it easy. You could probably never do anything about that.
Just like you're always going to think everyone else has got better kit.
Exactly. That feels to me like a fact of soldiering life. And also a part of how you are a unit, how you are cohesive. You think you're the only ones doing the effort. It's part of how you're bound together as a group. But pest supplies, that's a management problem. That is a management, logistical, operational level problem, right? That you ought to be solving. Sorting out replacement centres, that's a problem that you should be solving. I mean, I don't know how you convince the local civilians that you turning up and shelling everything is for their own good, and of course in Normandy there's all those reports of the sullen population, people not being particularly pleased to see us, and they're wondering if it's because they're sympathetic to the Germans. I don't think it is. I think it's because they're unsympathetic to having their communities destroyed.
Their centuries-old community completely destroyed.
Wiped off the map, in order to winkle out a company of Panzer Grenadiers or whatever. Then we go on. Many patients entertain the belief that they've been improperly classified originally and not been given the work they were best suited to do. Again, that strikes me as that's armies. That's how people feel about armies. I should have been an engineer.
I think particularly about the US Army. If you've got any kind of technical skill whatsoever, you're whittled off to be a kind of ground crew or in some technical role. If you're bright and clever, you tend to kind of end up in the Air Forces or the Navy or whatever. I mean, there is this sense that it is absolutely the grunts that are sent to the infantry, and it's the infantry that are doing all the hard yards. That's the problem. I mean, I came across this casualties within the 34th Red Bull Division who had been throughout Tunisia, but not in Sicily. Between the 28th of December and I think the 1st of February or something like that. And overall, they lost 37% of their division in that month.
Yeah.
But amongst rifle companies, it's 67.2.
Yeah.
So why would your morale be good?
Well, exactly.
I mean, but today, if a division or a brigade is down to 30, has got 30% casualties, you would think it's no longer
combat ineffective. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, of course, if you're an infantryman, you wish you were driving a truck. I mean, yes. I could drive. It's not. It's but it's weird. But it's interesting that this is being expressed. It's being logged, and it is being fed into the system. Right. The point 10. There was an undue delay in being paid and delivery of mail. Well, and there you go. Bad admin, bad management. That's something you have to solve.
Equals bad morale.
You absolutely have to fix that, because a big component of morale is the men feeling that that no one cares about them. And if they feel that no one cares about them, then they don't matter. The war doesn't matter. Nothing matters. And your morale goes gurgling down a plug hole. And
what am I doing in this shit pit anyway?
Yeah. I haven't got the letter from my sweetheart I was promised. They're lying. The people in charge are lying to me because they told me there'd be mail. And it inevitably breaks down trust. So, which has to break down combat effectiveness. I'm not going to fight for that, because they don't care, these people who are telling me what to do, because I don't care about them. They don't care about me. And maybe what we've seen, again, it's impossible to really know what's going on in Ukraine, but the signs that Russian morale has fallen in on itself must surely be to do this idea that the army doesn't care about its men, and armies have to sometimes do things to show that they care, don't they? It's sort of.
Yeah, completely.
And like escape hatches on a Churchill tank tell you that the army cares about you.
Yes. Yeah.
You're not just driving. You're not just driving a steel coffin about.
And I think the problem with all those problems which are highlighted at the end of August 1943 are then exacerbated by the winter in southern Italy.
Yeah.
And there's also this sort of, when you do get out of the front line, you go back into kind of, Caserta or back to Naples or whatever. And all you see is vast numbers of troops who aren't fighting, who are kind of base wallers, and who are, and they're shagging, Italian girls and all this kind of stuff. And you just think, what the hell? What the heck? I mean, it's very interesting. Did I send it to you? There was this other thing about that Sherman tank. They're saying, it hasn't got as good armour as even a Panzer IV, and it's rubbish, and all the rest of it. And then the literally last line was, but the truth is, these guys are just all really tired.
Yeah. They want to rest,
and because they're constantly having to kind of do more with less in this theatre than they are with the prioritisation of what's going on in the Pacific, but also in the build-up for Overlord. Everyone knows that, and that builds up resentment, which then means that kind of small things get exaggerated, and that's and a rumour comes out that Mark Clarke's taken Rome, and if he sees a British soldier he's going to get shot, which is obviously total bollocks and absolute Chinese whispers. But it soon starts to spread, and you can't stop it, and 80 years later people are still saying that Mark Clarke's rubbish.
Then point 11, among officers, the most common belief noted was that they had been improperly classified and were doing minor duties which could easily have been handled by officers of lower rank. In addition, recognition and promotions were not available as a reward for duties efficiently performed. So basically saying, I've got all this bloody paperwork to do. Can't someone else do it? Why am I having to do this? Which is a sort of another version of that improperly classified originally for infantrymen, which they'd drive a truck. It's basically, I mean, if you're an officer, you've so much to do. And again, it's the thing Max talked the other day about Batman. That you've got, because after all, they're reading the mail that leads to this comments on morale type stuff, these officers, and logging it all and passing on. Right, and then there are four comments on morale at the bottom, conclusions of this. 1, many men, and this is amazing, many men do not have a clear understanding of what they are fighting for. There is a definite lack of understanding concerning the whole situation, and they do not know their role in the war.
That's amazing, isn't it?
That's August 1943. So the Americans have been in for 18 months, or, best part of nearly 2 years. And maybe it's because they're fighting in Europe that they don't know why they're fighting in Europe. Maybe soldiers in the Pacific wouldn't say that. They'd know why they were fighting the Japanese, wouldn't they? Because of Pearl Harbor. But they might not know why they're fighting the Germans.
Yeah.
And certainly their fathers fought the Germans and no one really knows why, you could argue.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting point. 2, they do not understand why they are sent overseas while millions of other soldiers remain in the United States.
Well, this was the other point that Tammy was making. She was saying, you know, best part of 500,000 men working on the B-29.
Yeah. But all that B-29 stuff from James's book certainly strikes me as, you know, colossal sunk cost fallacy, colossal, you know, that people have staked their reputations on this thing, so it's going to work, rather than are we doing the right thing?
Yeah.
You know, and the power of that thinking to the point where the Air Force is trying to win an argument rather than the war. I find that's so interesting and sort of... anyway, then point 3, passive dependent trends have been fostered.
What a phrase.
What a phrase. Passive dependent trends have been fostered.
What does that mean?
Well, does it mean people aren't thinking for themselves, are being encouraged not to think for themselves? People aren't taking the initiative. They're being passive, they're being dependent.
That's one of the byproducts of having a conscript army when you're putting kind of the lowest in the food chain and in the front line.
Yeah.
I want to keep my head down, mate. You know, why should I bust a gut?
I think
that's also that's obviously also connected to what the hell are we doing here?
Well, and that's also connected to my mail hasn't come. I'm dependent on the mail. I'm passively dependent on the mail. I'm passively dependent on my pest treatments, and they haven't come. I'm not going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because that phrase obviously means everything to the person reading this document. Like it's like absolute ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, like we've got a real problem. Question, and then point 4. Rash promises have been made, or false rumours allowed to spread without denial, etc., that troops would be sent home after combat, especially in Tunisia.
Yep.
And it concludes, it would appear that more education is required at home to give the soldier a clear understanding of the situation and what he is actually fighting for.
Yeah. Well, that does change.
I mean, it's the most extraordinary thought. Passive dependent trends have been fostered. Because how do you... Because, I mean, after all, you know, and this is absolute meat for... This is raw meat for Jonathan Fennell, this kind of document.
Yeah.
And
I think I sent it to him as well.
You did send it to him, and he comes back going, wow, the date's really, really striking. That this is the problem. Going it, you know, because it's going into it's 31st of August, so it's, you know, just this time of year. You're starting to go into the autumn. So the weather's getting worse, it's getting wetter, the nights are getting longer, it's getting colder. You know, all things that because after all, the Second World War operates in this very peculiar space where the campaigning season runs all year when it ought to stop. You know, it's only in Burma really where the campaign season turns itself on when the monsoon stops, then turns itself off again when the monsoon starts again. So I think it's strictly speaking. So I mean it's very. I mean this is an amazing document, Jim.
Yeah, well, and it's full of it. And then there's this whole piece by Mark Clarke on kind of, you know, we haven't got the right attitude. You know, you've got to, you know, you're supposed to be killing Germans. You know, You know, and that's quite kind of tough talking. The other thing, I mean, yesterday I had a fascinating day because I spent literally the entire day looking at the John Lucas papers, which are vast. And fortunately, I mean, his diaries are fascinating. And also what's clear is that there's an awful lot of personal face-to-face communication between all the serious commanders, whether you know, he's Sixth Corps commander, but you know, he's constantly talking to Troy Milton and to Keyes at 2 Corps and you know, and Truscott and all these kind of people. And face-to-face. And also, you know, Clarke is beetling around as well. You know, sort of met with Clarke, you know, he says this and, you know, I said that back. And, you know, there's an awful lot of comms going on, which obviously reflects well, I think.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really interesting is he kept all his G2 reports, which came in daily during the Anzio campaign, during the Anzio bridgehead.
Yeah.
And the G2 obviously is intelligence. So there's a kind of picture, you know, what do we know about the Germans? What's this? And they have each of the G2 reports, which are issued at 8 o'clock every morning. They have a sort of summary of the situation, but then quite often they have add-ons, like we've discovered there's this new division in the line, and here's some information about it. It was formed in such and such. But they also have loads and loads of translations of captured diaries and and stuff on. There's a whole thing on the Panzer. What do you call it? Panzerfaust.
Yeah.
For example, that they've captured, which is interesting because I'm not sure. Yeah, no, it's the Panzer Schreck that they capture in Normandy, isn't it? Anyway. But let me tell you, the captured diaries reveal that German morale is certainly not improved on American morale by any stretch of the imagination.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well,
so I mean, it's gold dust really, and I wasn't really expected to get that, but he just kept the whole lot, so it's just absolutely tons of it. I got a bit sort of, I thought I can't really get all the G3 ones as well, which is a kind of sort of operational summaries as well. So I was like, God, there's a limit to how much I can kind of take in here. But the G2s were really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. And you can see the Antioch campaign evolve. There's a sort of urgency and a kind of sort of, oh shit, we're up the creek and the Germans are counterattacking. And then by kind of sort of, middle of March, it's all kind of, by April, it's kind of, we were kind of showing them all day and, German prisoners are all really low, which is one of the reasons why they're able to kind of destroy the 14th Army, because they're already shot by their experiences around Antioch. But listen, you've got your book coming out imminently, haven't you?
Imminently, the 13th.
Finished copies in yet?
No, I haven't had a finished copy yet. But no, what we're planning all these book signings, and we'll put those up on the Patreon as to where they are. At the moment, they're all extremely heavy pencils in the diary. But we are trying to sort of coincide it with a tour as well, because after all, I'm going up and down the country anyway, so we're going to Leeds and Warrington.
Might as well go to the local Waterstones.
Exactly. So we've got a load of those planned. Plus, I'm going to Coles in Bicester at some point to sign a huge pile of books for patrons for your dedications. I will not be drawing.
Oh, fantastic.
I will not be drawing. Just make that clear right now.
There'll be no Spitfires over
There'll be no
ground.
Spitfires. I will not be drawing any Piats, right? You can't make me, Patreon regulars. And there's...
Did I see you're going up to York? Is York on the list?
We've been to York. We started in York.
You go Yorkshire again? If you ever get to Ripon, there's a lovely bookshop there called the Little Bookshop.
I don't know if I can't remember, Jim.
Really
I mean, I'll tell you what I'll do. So the signings are Leeds, Waterstones.
Oh, okay. So you're Ripon's just
yeah, we are.
You are
going. We are. Yes, we are going to Yorkshire. Leeds, Waterstones on the 13th of October. Then on the 15th, we'll be in Sheffield at the Waterstones there. Ipswich on the 20th. Northampton on the 21st. Crewe on the 22nd. Woking on the 23rd. Farnham on the 3rd of November. Hastings, and they roll on, and they kind of tie into the last chunk of tour dates we're doing, kind of once the book's out. So plenty of opportunities to press the flesh with independent company members, which is exciting, and any listeners who haven't succumbed to our Patreon hustle. Anyway, that's all we've got time for, everybody. Thanks very much for listening. Jim, thanks for joining us for the first thing in the morning in the US. We will see you all again really soon. Bye bye.
Reassuring to see you, I can assure you. Cheerio.